Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the Press Club with me, Kendall Burton, and my co-host, Mr. Earl Boski, where we review the big stories making news each and every week, as well as issues affecting the media generally. As usual, we start with a review of this weekend's newspapers, starting with the Voice newspaper. The yacht arrivals up by 28%. South Marina crucial, says maritime consultant, with a photograph of the maritime consultant in the Ministry of Tourism, Mr. Cuthbert Didier. The Star newspaper will present and past leaders unite against impact's fallout. And we were always the big disappointment, not Laverne, referencing the St. Lucian high jumper at the Rio Olympics. And the Mirror newspaper, headline Liberation Day, musical concert to raise funds for music icon with cancer. And of course we have the usual inserts, Mr. Buski's favorites tonight, although I suspect you're not too pleased with this.
No.
Week's edition.
As sure as night follows day.
Sports and Health from the Star newspaper as well, and the Yo magazine, featuring our champion chefs from the recent cook-off in Barbados. Anything jumps out at you this weekend?
Yeah, the Star front page.
Unite against the impact.
Will the present and past leaders unite against the impact fallout? That's a very new line, I must say, a departure from everything that the Star has, Star publisher has said about, the impacts, I think, historically, and not without going to a certain level of placing the whole impact load on the former Prime Minister, but also issuing a warning to the present Prime Minister that his predecessor may have meant more than what we heard when he pointed out before the election that whichever party forms the next government will have to deal with the impacts report. From all I've read in the Star Center spread today, the current administration is coming to grips with the extent, the depth, the width, and the full impact of the impacts case. The Star is quoting the Caribbean News Now out of Barbados as making statements that were hitherto unknown in St. Lucia, well, certainly to the Star, insofar as the U.S. Embassy having again recently issued another public statement indicating once again that the U.S. will settle for nothing less than the prosecution of persons identified in the report. The Star notes also that whereas the Prime Minister and the former Minister of Home Affairs, in his capacity as chairman of the party, had indicated that the party would have moved to solve the impacts problem within 100 days by appointing a commission of 4 judges. That has changed now to, according to the Star, the Prime Minister is now offering to appoint a commission, but comprising representatives of the European Union, the United States, and the interested countries rather than judges. And the Star is apparently saying that, hey, be careful about that. It may be necessary because, as usually happens, nothing on the headline is mentioned in the story. So that whereas the headline is suggesting that Prime Minister Chasney should make a call to former Prime Minister Anthony and ask that they work together to resolve the impacts crisis in the interest of St. Lucia. There's no such mention of that in the article, but a hint is a hint is a hint by whatever words. And it's left to be seen whether the Prime Minister will take the recommendation of Mr. Requien to make a call to Kenny Anthony and tell him, let's dance.
But to what end? Because it underscores the point that has been made previously. When it comes to government and international relations, there's no color. Nobody's looking at SLP or UWP as the government of St. Lucia, as was pointed out in the case of the development in Vieux Fort. negotiations started with one government, the government changed, but it's still the government of St. Lucia. And as far as the United States and the European Union are concerned, the government of St. Lucia needs
is
to
the
deal with
government
this
of
issue,
St. Lucia.
right? But it raises a number of interesting points, as you alluded to. How the government is going to proceed is interesting because this case cannot proceed without a DPP, which we do not have. Since Victoria Charles Clark went on retirement, we've not been able to get a replacement. And from what I heard in the news this week, the applications and the people are breaking down the doors to get into the position. The salary, I'm told, is not attractive enough. The Prime Minister, we heard, is considering increasing that salary. Is it going to become more attractive? Are we going to get a DPP sooner rather than later? Are we going to see this government's term in office expire before the impacts report is addressed to the liking of the European Union or the United States government?
Well, these things have a way of happening and not happening. I remember, like I said, I always make reference to the previous Carl Hudson Phillips report, which I read in its entirety. I'm not aware that any of its recommendations were implemented. It had been commissioned by one government, and the report came under another government, and I'm not sure that it has seen the light of day since then. To what extent did the Carl Hudson Phillips report influence or have anything to do with the subsequent report, the impacts report? Has anybody in the Ministry of Home Affairs in the past or presently, or at the DPP's office for that matter, compared the Carl Hudson Phillips report, which was an investigation into the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, again featuring killings or deaths of persons at the hands of policemen? I always refer to the fact that one police officer was accused of 11 extrajudicial killings, all of which were certified by an inquest to have been lawful. And therefore the police officer died a natural death without facing one day of justice, insofar as the relatives of his victims are concerned. So that the impacts report is going to remain the impacts report. We are going to continue paying the penalty. The U.S. has, in another statement referred to by the Star, has said that it maintains that it cannot review, which suggests that somebody asked that the State Department review the application of the Leahy Act, which prevents the United States from funding the Royal St. Lucia Police Force in any way. The biggest impact that is having is that our Coast Guard cannot get any of the equipment it requires to keep it going because they were donated by the United States. The other impact is that our police officers are running out of ammunition, bullets for their police guns. And St. Lucian police officers still cannot participate in any regional security activity funded by the United States, even if it is taking place in St. Lucia. So, yes, the impacts report is not going to go away. Another revelation in the Star today is that there is a feeling, it doesn't say whether it's in St. Lucia or the U.S., but in reference to the recent visit by the Prime Minister to Barbados, when he spoke to the U.S. ambassador. The Star story is saying that there is a feeling, a strong feeling, that the appointment of the former Minister of Home Affairs and National Security to the position of High Commissioner in London is intended to give him the level of diplomatic immunity that would shield him from being called upon by the State Department or by the European Union to give an account. Now, the Prime Minister says there's nothing in the report. He's read it from page to page and cover to cover, and there's nothing in it that would require, in his view, that Mr. Guy Mears not be considered as the High Commissioner to Britain, and he did point out, as he said, that Britain had no objection. And therefore, the appointment will go ahead. So, impacts, the impact of impacts continues to be.
But you know, my issue with all of this, as you pointed out earlier, despite the request for the review, that the United States remains adamant, whereas
and the European Union.
Yeah, but in the case of the United States, who's applying the Leahy Law, which is a US-based initiative, precedents suggest that the United States can and has been flexible with its application of the Leahy Law, depending on which jurisdiction is applied in. And there are cases where the police officers or the soldiers in question will merely shift from one division into another. They were not prosecuted. They never faced a judge or a court. You know, now you consider that in light of St. Lucia and the Caribbean's value to the U.S. war against drugs, and you wonder why the United States is being so stiff-necked about this thing.
Could it be that because we're not sufficiently strong in our representation? You look at the other big case, the Grindberg case. You know, the cost of these sort of representations. In the Grindberg case, for example, we spoke about that. The volume of his suit required a deposit that he claims he couldn't afford. In this particular case, to make a case to the State Department to review the Leahy Law would require an outlay of funds for some American lawyer or firm that is good at the lobbying business, which is what the previous administration was able to do in securing funding from a company involved in the CIP to fund the cost of some representation, you know, in Washington. But again, the question came up as to why do we have to make somebody else pay the bill? What's in it for them? Vis-a-vis the fact that ways and means had been found legally to finance the cost of representation. So I think if, like you said, the precedent, not if, as we know, precedent exists where the U.S. can be flexible, it would follow that one of the options open to the administration would be to do what it has to do to make that level of representation at the State Department, build a case, use those precedents, cite the effects on St. Lucia, cite the effects on our ability to patrol our borders, you know, insofar as drugs and smuggling and so on is concerned. What is going to happen if one day the police run out of bullets before the 10 cases are heard? And as the Stars suggests there again, you have a situation where in 2 or 3 of those cases, an inquest, which is a legal court, has ruled that they were legal. So what's going to happen there? Is the DPP going to be asked to reopen those cases? On the question of a DPP, again, the Star says that the Prime Minister ought to have known or did know that Victoria Charles Clarke was going on leave, and therefore ought to have taken steps to appoint a new DPP. But again, at that, if the argument is the price, then no person, no lawyer who can fit the bill seems to want to risk you know, all that will come with prosecuting those cases for cents instead of dollars.
We're due for a break. Let's take it. When we come back, we'll review some of the other stories making the news this week. This is the Press Club. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We shift our focus now to the Voice headline. The newspaper says yacht arrivals up by 28%. South Marina crucial, says maritime consultant. It goes on to quote some of the figures for the first quarter of 2016, as it says in the headline, up by 28% yacht arrivals. And you have Cuthbert Didier being quoted there by Stan Bishop saying what he has said for many, many years. And I've asked him, you know, if he's not gotten tired or frustrated, but there's somebody who's passionate about the yachting industry, who sees its potential and has been struggling for many years to get that, to convey that passion to some of the persons in authority. We've seen steps taken over the years to improve things. Some of his complaints and his frustrations have been answered, but he says again in the article that a lot more needs to be done. One of his biggest complaints was the amount of red tape that the yachties had to go through, to frustrating the process. Steps have been taken by the previous administration, and hopefully they'll be continued by this administration to alleviate and remove some of that red tape, which is being now attributed for the increase, the 28% increase in yacht arrivals. He has always maintained that the value of the yachting sector has not been fully appreciated in terms of the spend. The larger yachts means more people coming, more people spending money, as opposed to the cruise ship sector, which seems to be getting a lot of the focus of the tourism industry, where cruise visitors can come and not spend as much or not spend anything because they basically have everything on that ship. Where the yachties come, they need groceries to eat, they partake in entertainment, they indulge or immerse themselves in the local culture. So a lot of opportunities, a lot of potential for the yachting sector, and he's focusing on the developments in the south, or the potential or planned developments in the south, saying that the marina mentioned by the Prime Minister for Vieux Fort would further boost the local yachting sector.
No, I think when it comes to honoring people for lifetime achievements, the article points out that Cuthbert has been crying in the wilderness for all of 3 decades. And I think more and more we're coming to the realization, like you have, I have, most people have, that yachting is in fact worth the attention that he's pointing out. I mean, when you look at the figures, that we had 14,000 yachts in the first 6 months of last year, in the comparative period, quarter or whatever, we had 14,000 yachts visiting St. Lucia, and the figure now is 16,000.
16,571.
16,571. One activity, the Mercury Beach, alone brought over 500 yachts. I think, and Cuthbert has been able to pull the figures together, and not only that, like he says, they've been able to put into effect the process to record the number of yachts that go into Soufrière, because the recordings are only being done in Rodney Bay and Marigot Bay.
Yeah.
So that at the end of the day, you know, Cuthbert is passionate about it. He's a lone voice in the ocean. I would recommend him for a golden anchor for his passion.
Dedication.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things he's pointing out, like you just said, the yachts are getting bigger. The people stay longer. They not only come and go, but you also have an increasing situation where more yachties come. They leave their yachts here for 6 months. They spend 6 months here during the winter. They leave the yacht here and they go up for 6 months. They have a house here, an apartment. They got to leave gardeners and people to take care of the house. They got to pay somebody to take care of the yacht. And while they're here on the yacht, like you said, they have to go out, go in, spend. So therefore, yes, yachting is more beneficial in terms of direct income to the country than the cruise sector. But it's not a situation of either or, because the cruise sector is going to get bigger when the P&O lines start to call from Vieux Fort later in November, later this year. And his recommendation that they look at the area by the Wheel Rock place, because of its proximity to the airport and to the seaport, that would be fantastic for Vieux Fort, you know, and let's just hope Cuthbert lives to see it.
Yeah, but you know, quite apart from just the arrivals and the spend, you know, he has always spoken about the other aspects of the sector and developing those aspects. Like, creating an industry, you know, training young people in boat building, boat maintenance, boat repair. You know, we had the trip to Taiwan under the previous administration of Emma Hippolyte, and, you know, he was part of that trip, you know, making links with the Taiwanese boat builders, you know, creating those links with Brazil. And
certainly, you look at the offspin of the industry is already active. We have the St. Lucia Yacht Club having an active, very much involved training, ongoing training scheme to encourage young persons into yachting. Not the usual sons and daughters of the well-to-do, but everybody. And that they went all the way to Tobago and to the Grenadines recently. There's a young St. Lucian lawyer. I think he builds more boats than he argues cases, you know, but there's a yacht builder here, a speedboat builder, I should say, a young, like I said, a young lawyer, a young St. Lucian, 100% St. Lucian, and he's built an industry around building speedboats, and he's getting his orders from far and wide, and of course he'll have his complaints about the attitude of our workers, you know, the spend all the money, don't come to work after you get paid kind of approach. But the spin-off of yachting is picking up, you know, it is picking up. You just look at the marina. I might also throw in here that Sheikh Dr. Walid Jufali's first visit to St. Lucia was on his mega yacht. That said, what more can I say?
We're due for a break already. Let's take another one. When we come back, we'll focus on the Liberation concert happening this weekend for musician Francis de Lima, and we can look at some of the other developments regionally and internationally as well. Welcome back to the Press Club. Let's shift our focus now to the Mirror newspaper headline. Liberation Day musical concert to raise funds for music icon with cancer. A reference here to the fact that Francis de Lima, well-known and popular music producer, has been diagnosed with stomach cancer. Immediately after the news hit social media, I think it was broken there before anywhere else. A lot of the local musicians and artists that he had worked with, including some regional artists, have come on board to offer support, financial and other support to Libo and his family. We have this major concert taking place to raise funds. A number of artists have committed to performing, and not just performing, but have signed off some of their royalties to meet some of the financial burden that's going to be applied to this family as they seek treatment for him. But it points to a growing issue here in St. Lucia, which was touched on by Dr. Owen Gabriel, the local oncologist. The growing number of cancer cases, and not just cancer cases, but specific kinds of cancer, including gastrointestinal and stomach cancer, as we have in the case of Libo. And even as we covered this story, the Libo story this week, a lot of the focus was on him and not so much on the condition and the cancer, the implications for St. Lucia's health system, for the economy, for the families, you know, of the sufferers of cancer. You know, your take?
No, I think kudos, hats off, everything, all the congratulations and encouragement should go out to the organizers of this concert. It is indicating once again that, you know, in unity there's strength, and musicians are made of flesh and blood like everybody else, and they feel for each other, and I think this is a very good example of, you know, we all are one and we ought to help each other. We ought to be our brothers and sisters keepers. It also encourages us to look at the possibility of widening the scope of activity of musicians, helping musicians. There are other musicians who are sick and in need of help. I can mention Get Through, who has been in and out of hospital over the past fortnight. Last I heard, he's not doing too well. I could very well encourage the Calypso Association and the musicians after the Liberation concert, or as part of it, to pass a hat around for Get Through as well. It all depends on how far advanced their respective illnesses are. But I think the point you made also needs to be understood within the context of what is happening. This is to raise funds to help Libo. I'm not sure that those raising the funds and organizing the activity would want to take on the additional burden or task of explaining the dangers of cancer. Of course, that's our role in the media, but it's also the role of the medical fraternity. As you said, Dr. Owen Gabriel has talked about increasing incidence of new forms of cancer or old types of cancer spreading wider and faster. We used to associate cancer with old people. You know, like Henry H. Breen associated, speaking of Quayle in his time, to toothless old women in St. Lucia. But the Liberation concert, I would like to see it be the first of many more to come. And let it also be an example to other bodies of like-minded people, whether professionals, musicians, whatever, to be able to come together. Of course, it's not the first time, but this is the one that has probably got the most attention. And like I said, kudos to them.
It's something that I know Kenny Anthony has referred to constantly in most of his public addresses and speeches, the ability for St. Lucians in time of need, time of disaster, you know, to pull together, you know. So we have demonstrated over and over that we can be and are our brothers and sisters keepers. But unfortunately, I think too many of these activities have to be held, sadly. We look at the Pine Hill Walk this year, for instance, having to raise funds for the World Pediatric Project to deliver life-saving surgeries to underserved children. We got the Yo Play Walk by First Caribbean CIBC. The Super J Yo Play Walk as well, both for cancer. You know, last year I took part in both of those walks, and I can't remember in which one. But somewhere along the Maris Hill Highway, there was this lady in her balcony, decked out in pink. Pink nightgown, pink robe, pink hair tie, pink flag and banner, you know, obviously a cancer patient herself, you know, and she was out in her balcony waving to everybody and thanking everybody, you know, as much as she could, you know, for going out, you know, and helping. So it is something, I think almost everybody in St. Lucia I could think of knows somebody who has been touched by cancer, if not directly, you know, knows somebody who has, you know.
Well, again, it brings into question whether this is the new wave, whether this is the new way, because you have the National Community Foundation that organizes the telethon, and they haven't been doing well of late. You know, the amounts, they haven't been able to meet their targets. So maybe they need to revisit the means. You know, I think if 5,000 people are prepared to pay $25 to go each to go on the Pine Hill Walk,
yeah, but that's another issue. 5,000 people show up for Pine Hill. The Yo Play Walk pulls a lot less than that. Similarly with the CIBC Walk for Cancer, you know, and as I said, a lot of people are touched by cancer in one form or another. Most of us know somebody who is touched by it, whether directly in our family or otherwise, and yet still those walks don't pull the kind of people, the kind of numbers that the Pine Hill does, you know. And I have an issue with that, but it's a lifestyle disease, you know, and we cannot wait on companies like the banks and, you know, Super J or now Massey stores, you know, to fund, you know, those cancer patients or the organizations that support them. You know, the emphasis has to be on prevention, and that's why I think the media has a role to play as well, you know, by bringing to light, you know, some of the issues associated with it, encouraging people, you know, to live lifestyles that are healthier, exercise, watch your food choices, you know, to prevent cancer in the first place, you know. But having said that, there are other issues at play. You know, as much as we want people to eat healthy and to exercise. I mean, statistically and traditionally, all the way back to the 60s, has been established, you know, that the people in the lower income brackets, they don't have gym memberships. They don't have time to exercise because, you know, they're too busy eking out a living, you know, trying to get by, you know, and the fact is that the better and healthier food items are more expensive and perhaps out of their reach as well, you know. So there's a lot of issues at play, you know. It is a serious problem, and as I said, the prevention, you know, it remains the main issue and focus. And speaking of cancer, we can stay on the health issue and talk about Zika. We learned that 20-something, I think 26 women, pregnant women, have been diagnosed with Zika in St. Lucia. We also learned from the Ministry of Health this week that the Aedes aegypti mosquito may not be the only vector carrying the disease, you know, which raises a lot more concerns about prevention. And that remains the number one
Have they named any other insect or any what other carriers?
It's just the mosquitoes. I don't know, but even on my Sunday morning run, you know, it's stuff you don't get to see when you drive. You see as you pass. As much as the ministry has been talking about cleaning up your surroundings, it's amazing the amount of containers and old tires that are still littering our roadsides, collecting water, you know, and breeding grounds, you know, for the Zika. But we're due for a break. Let's take the break. When we come back, we'll wrap up. Welcome back. We are watching the Press Club. Before the break, we were talking about the Zika virus. We touched on the major headlines in the newspapers. We didn't get much time. Time flies by so quickly to touch on some of the other stories making the news, like this article by Peter Jose in the Star newspaper, For Politics is No Science, for a photograph from the signing of the deal with the government.
Does he say that politics is the art of the possible?
And DSH, the Prime Minister having gone to China at the invitation of the Chief Executive Officer of DSH, Mr. Aking, to view some of the projects over there, to rest some of the fears or concerns that have been raised about the local project and the potential success of that project here.
He has reported on it.
Yeah, yes, he has. What is the latest on that?
He has reported on it. On Thursday, there was an item in The Voice in which the Prime Minister was saying, in effect, that everything is clear, everything that the investor said about themselves is true. They are open to transparency, they're open to answering questions, and he's very much gung-ho about, he leaves no doubt that the government is going to be going ahead with the project, and that the government has all the confidence in the company. One of the things that hasn't been made clear, but probably needs to be done, is that they keep referring to it as a Chinese company, but it's a company. It's a Malaysian-owned company. The chairman, Mr. Aking, or whatever, he is really Malaysian. It's a Malaysian company that is operating out of Hong Kong, and as you know, Hong Kong is a global financial center. So there is no evidence that the People's Republic of China, or the Communist Party of China for that matter, has shares in the company, the DSH Holdings. I almost said Dash Holdings. But the fact is that the government continues to be urged to ensure that it crosses all its T's and dots all its I's on the project, not only the opposition in St. Lucia, but there's an interesting red flag raised all the way in Taiwan by none other than my former co-host elsewhere, Dennis Springer, in an article in the Mirror today, very long one. He goes out of the way to warn the government that it should, in his words, be careful, because in his view, this company is a front for the Communist Party of China, which is looking to establish itself in St. Lucia so that the Chinese government can have influence over St. Lucia. He's also advising that the current administration should hire a Taiwanese company that he has named to undertake repairs to the stadium come hospital. He's named the company several times. He's also recommending that that Taiwanese company, which I guess he must know very well, he's also suggesting that that Taiwanese company be given the contract to finish the St. Jude Hospital, because that company was the one that finished the wellness center, which he described as a monolith built for mad people, which gives the impression that every other St. Lucian is crazy. The same company that built the swim center. And I guess from his argument, he's saying this company is only being asked to do little things. It's about time it's been given a big job. But he points to Bahamas, the Bahar, that huge project, Chinese funded project in the Bahamas, which on Cable Beach, the Prime Minister has said that yes, it ran into financial problems, but it's going to be coming back on. It's going to be back on in September. He points out, however, and that is where the issues come in, the company that was responsible is described as Chinese. However, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the United States. You know, and I don't know of Chinese companies filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy anyway, far less in the United States. So, yes, Mr. Springer is waving a red flag and hoping that the Prime Minister will see it. The Prime Minister is, in fact, on his way to Taiwan as we speak, following his visits to his visit to China. From Taiwan, or in Taiwan, he will be joining the minister in the Ministry of Home Affairs, who, by the way, has made it clear that she didn't go to China. And therefore, it seems she's keeping her distance from this casino, horse racing, gambling project as much as possible. So she's made it clear she didn't go to China. She is in Taiwan. And she and the Prime Minister are going to be arranging, among other things, a state visit by the Prime Minister and other representatives of the government. The extent to which the Taiwanese may or may not be concerned about that size of an investment based in Hong Kong is something that has not surfaced, but I suspect we'll hear more from Mr. Springer after the Prime Minister visits Taiwan, because he's surely going to wave those two red flags at him.
And I think they're justified, and I think we'll hear a lot more from the opposition as well once the Prime Minister returns, because the issue here is not the legitimacy of the company DSH behind the project, because you could Google it and you could see their track record, what they've accomplished, you know, in Asia, in the Middle East.
Well, what is Mr. Josie's take on that?
You know, but I think the issue here is what the opposition has raised. What is the cost for St. Lucia? What is St. Lucia getting out of it? You know, how many passports are going to be granted under the CIP? You know, issues like that. The environmental impact. Is the land that's going to be involved going to be ceded over to this company? How much of it is going to remain St. Lucian? You know, issues like that. So the trip to China and seeing what DSH is doing over there, to my mind, wasn't necessary, not as a non-issue. The questions that remain have to be answered by the Prime Minister on his return.
Did Mr. Josie raise the point about water? His first comment on it was that given the size of the project, there was no plan for a water plant, you know, to feed 1,000 apartments, hotel apartments, and, you know, a stadium, a horse racing complex that is going to make our stadium look like a cricket pitch.
Speaking of stadiums, what do you think about this suggestion by Fortuna Belrose that the George Odlum Stadium needs to be removed or relocated?
Well, I thought, I never thought I would hear that from an Olympic sports administrator. She must have her reasons. I don't know whether her reasons tie in with Mr. Springer's article, in which he is also suggesting that some urgent repairs be done there, because he's accusing the Chinese of using the wrong steel, and
Yeah,
the
well,
clock tower or is ready to fall down on someone. I thought I would have heard Minister Belrose saying that, you know, it's going to be fixed up to ensure that the next, what we missed out the last time, what was it? The Commonwealth Games. So that, you know, we could make our bid for the Commonwealth Games again. That's the argument. Move it to where?
The fact she's saying is that it's underutilized. It's not able to be used by the persons it was intended for, because
it's a hospital now.
No, but even before it was a hospital, it's too far removed from the central population. So the question was, should it be moved up north where more people are? And she said, not exactly up north, but, you know, closer to the northern side where more people live, more people are able to access it easier, transportation issues.
I beg to differ.
I do as well.
Because
I use the example, this week, going to the Philippines. I do judo. Looking for a judo school in the area I was staying was difficult. I could not get one. The closest one I could get was an hour and a half away. You know, but if you love the sport, you want to practice, you will make the sacrifice.
The stadium is there. You have to arrange the activities and arrange the transportation. If people don't want to pay bus, you got to consider whether you're gonna do the park and ride kind of a thing. I don't think distance. There's nowhere in St. Lucia that you take an hour. To get to. Nowhere in St. Lucia takes you an hour. You go around the island at my speed in less than half an hour. Less than an hour.
I think it's a mindset.
You know, I think the stadium was underutilized because it was underutilized. Somebody or some entity or entities must take the blame of its underutility. Are we satisfied that the Darren Sammy Stadium is being sufficiently utilized? You know,
it's being utilized, but for how much sports?
Yeah, but
there are a lot of shows being held there, a lot of concerts.
Right. You know? So I think it's a bigger issue as to what we are using the venues for, whether we are putting them to the use for which they were intended. Darren Sammy Stadium was built to host the West Indies cricket World Cup, the Cricket World Cup, and thereafter, and that's the question that is being raised after every Olympics. The big issue in Brazil now is, what are they going to do with all of those facilities that were built? And I saw one of the international TV news stations gave a sort of a review of the fact that after the last 5 Olympics, there are still stadia and other facilities that have just gone to waste and been allowed to grow trees. Again, these things didn't just stay so and go to waste. Somebody is not making use of them sufficiently. So perhaps in planning for those things, we also need to plan beyond the actual activity that they were planned for. The Chinese gave us a stadium. That's what Mr. Odlum asked for, and we got it. The Chinese couldn't make it to work for us. We had to make it work for us.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. As always, Mr. Bousky, a pleasure being here with you, discussing the stories in the news. A pleasure having you watch us. Next week, we'll be back here. Hopefully, you'll join us then, when we'll look at some of the big stories making news that week. See you then.